Like, listen, Mark, I don't like Stanley. I think the only person I have been was Stanley.
And Nate, Stanley doesn't state the obvious, like what's the up. He spews talking points. Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
The nature of American culture, it's a white people problem. Okay. I literally said they need to understand.
You really gotta let these people bother you like that. If they want to beef with you, it's called Stanley versus the world.
And just assume their character by stereotype?
I think people do that every day.
Okay, I didn't ask you. What
Do I think it's okay?
We look at presidential announcements that might move markets, the corruption is so egregious. But Ossoff has been very effective in, I think, calling that out and explaining it in terms that people go, okay, wow, how do you even start to?
Yeah, no, I think there's a sense that nothing matters and that explaining is a waste of time. And that all people want are like quick hits. They don't want anything linear or substantive. People don't read anymore. Why waste your time? And I think that's actually wrong. I mean, Tucker Carlson, for example, he's one of these people like Joe Rogan who has these podcasts that go on for hours. But as you remember Tucker's monologue, and I'm put aside the substance. You may strongly disagree with what he had to say. And a lot of it might have been BS, but he's basically making arguments and putting together data points. And I guess my point is, I think there still is a hunger and an opportunity for that. And there's all these things out there that Donald Trump...
I would not have cited Tucker Carlson as an example of that, but I hope your basic thesis is correct, that people still can do that.
And I think
intellectual dishonesty makes him a poor example, but
put aside, this to me, this is just philosophically neutral, right? And so my point is that people are willing to listen or watch a 5-minute speech or monologue about something if it's compelling, and if you're I think that Ossoff is now connecting the dots. There are all these data points that clearly, if they were put together, demonstrate that Donald Trump is guilty of so many things. But a lot of people, I think, have just given up trying in frustration.
And it's also hard to keep track of it. I mean, you and I do this for a living,
It's hard for us.
I would like to be able to say that if somebody said, name me the top 10 acts of corruption by Donald Trump, that I could just, whip them off. I'd actually have to spend a little time. It's like reminding myself of all the things, all of the betrayals, all of the lies, all of the failures that Donald Trump is doing. Congratulations to him. Okay, can we switch now to the darker part? Because I want to point out that John Ossoff was running for Senate in Georgia, and he's favored to win. And if he wins, he's going to be a presidential buzz. He'll be at the center of presidential buzz. This is a very effective Democratic message. You'll notice that he is not musing about abolishing prisons, defunding the police, seizing the means of production. I'm just mentioning that because, for people who say that, we need to go hard left in order to fight Donald Trump. What John Ossoff is doing is fighting Donald Trump. Taking positions that are unelectable in swing states is not fighting Donald Trump. You fight Donald Trump by beating Donald Trump in elections, not by taking positions that will alienate the voters who will make a decision in the minority, the majority. You and I have made this point over and over and over again, but I'm starting to see some of this commentary now where people are pointing out Democrats are doing well everywhere. I mean, just everywhere. It's kind of amazing how across the board Democratic Senate candidates and gubernatorial candidates are doing, with one exception.
A new poll last week.
One exception.
Let me read this to you. A new poll last week confirmed the Democratic establishment's fears that Michigan Senate nominee Abdul El Sayed could hurt its hopes of winning the chamber's majority. The Fox News poll showed his personal image 13 points underwater among registered voters, 42% favorable to 55% unfavorable, as he ran about even with his GOP opponent in a head-to-head matchup, trailing narrowly. But while El Sayed's potential drag on the Democratic ticket has gotten lots of attention, he is very much the exception for the party. In fact, it's Republican candidates who have the popularity problem in a number of key races. All told, across the 8 races that are most likely to determine the Senate majority, the GOP standard bearer has a net positive average image rating in just one race, Alaska, while every Democratic candidate except El Sayed is in positive territory. And in 7 of those 8 races, the Democratic nominee polls more popularly by between 8 and 24 points. I can go on, but I think you know where this.
Well, I think it's very important to start off by saying, I see people in the comment section about, that's the Fox poll. The Fox poll should not be confused with Fox News. The Fox poll is highly regarded. It is a legitimate poll. There's some numbers, and there's an analysis on MS Now of this that has also said these are warning signs. And one of the big warning signs is Jocelyn Benson is the Democratic candidate for governor in Michigan. She's polling very, very well. There is a delta. There's a big gap between people who are willing to vote for the Democratic candidate for governor in Michigan, according to these polls, and the Democratic candidate for Senate. In fact, Jocelyn Benson has a very strong lead among independents. This is the same poll, same state, Democratic candidate, strong lead among independents. El Sayed is deeply underwater with independents. So, for people who are, let's test that out as an experiment. What if we go far left? That's going to get you your progressive base. But what does it do for independents, for those voters who want to break with Trumpism, but are queasy about perhaps going too far the other side? And this is kind of a laboratory. Now, I hope that people, and I understand that there's a big constituency out there, do not tell us that there's an iceberg ahead, that, that's the problem. You should not tell us there's an iceberg ahead. But I think that this deserves at least attention in the near term because of its long-term consequences. This is about 2026, of course, but it's also about 2028. And you have to ask yourself, how do Democrats get to 270? Do they get to 270 with people like John Ossoff, or do they get to 270 with people who are struggling to win in Michigan like El Sayed?
And again,
I ask you.
Yes. And at 2028, very important, obviously. 2026, though, Democrats need to net 4 Senate seats to take back the Senate. 4. They need to net 4. The problem is Michigan.
I will stop this right here just to address some comments in the chat. Welcome to Stanley versus the World, folks. Everybody, please hit the like button on your way in, or hit the thumbs down. It all counts as far as interacting with the channel. It is Tuesday, kind of back to regular old politics, which seems to surprise some folks. If you look at the description of the channel, politics is one of the things that I like talking about. But in any case, welcome to the show. If you're new to the channel, please like, share, subscribe. That's pretty much it. Con, as far as Maggie Haberman goes, I'm on the fence about it. I think we already know who Donald Trump is. I don't think Donald Trump being corrupt and just getting more and more kind of egregious with the corruption, more and more out in the open. I just don't think, if you feel strongly about it, we can do it. But we all already know he's corrupt. Is Maggie Haberman really going to, reveal something that's impeachable? Probably, but that's not going to happen. Probably, because I'm not absolutely sure. I don't think the Democrats are going to take the Senate. So I don't know. Just throw your thoughts into the chat. It's not like I'm saying no. I'm just saying we kind of already know Donald Trump is corrupt. The military stuff. It's just this dude is probably going to be second only to Andrew Johnson at this point.
Is a Democratic seat already. So if Democrats lose in Michigan, now they have to win 5 seats. And so, you got Maine, you got Ohio. Now you got to win Texas, I guess, or Nebraska. I mean, it starts to become more difficult to cobble that together. Look, if there's a big enough blue wave in 26, I do think that it's doable. I think it's plausible that Democrats win Texas and lose Michigan and still take the Senate. But it's much harder than if you could just sort of hold that Democratic seat, obviously.
Math. It's math.
Yeah.
You're right.
All right, my friend. Well, let's see. We should talk about foreign policy a little bit. Not my bailiwick necessarily. We got South Korea and Oman. In South Korea, President Trump ordered the Pentagon to scale back annual joint military exercises with South Korea, saying the ally declined to help with the war against Iran and citing his good relationship with North Korea's Kim Jong-un.
Who is sending missiles
This is not
to
the
Iran,
onion.
who is sending a missile to the Russians, who is killing his own people, one of the most brutal dictators in the world, one of the most dangerous people to have nuclear weapons. Keeping in mind, we're allegedly having this war against Iran to keep them becoming nuclear. Is North Korea having a nuclear weapon less scary? And so Donald Trump, once again, is there any consultation? Was there any real discussion of this? He's butthurt that they wouldn't help him with the Strait of Hormuz, South Korea. So he's now abandoning them. His excuse is basically adopting North Korean propaganda lines that these exercises are somehow hostile. So we've abandoned North Korea. Obviously, an indication that our Asian allies are going to be thrown under the bus the same way that our European allies have been thrown under the bus. Interesting, this occurs at the same moment that he's withdrawn the last U.S. aircraft carrier from the Pacific Ocean. Think about that we don't have anything. So Make America Great is making Kim Jong-un great, and it's making Red China great. I'm sorry for those who were offended by calling it Red China. But here's a guy who's railing. We just focus on this side, railing against communists here. That everybody's a communist. The biggest threat to America is communism. And what does he do? He's appeasing actual, real communists. He's saying that, but I love actual, real communists. Yes, they may be sending missiles that are killing Americans, but he says nice things about me. So therefore, I'm going to appease Kim Jong-un the way that I suck up to Vladimir Putin. And again, show me one Republican.
Now, for folks who don't know, Charlie Sykes is a conservative. For years, he was, like a conservative, a conservative's conservative. Both these guys were like Reagan conservatives, and Trump is so much just not conservative that they've been, flabbergasted by the inconsistencies. Look, if you want to understand Trump, think businessman. We know what running the country like a CEO is about now. There's no reason to ever elect another CEO type businessman into the presidency. So I'm not going to even belabor the point. I think we all know how fucked up Trump is gone uh, in these 2 years. And all the little Brian Nichols and all the little Bobby Perkins, dude, y'all are just trying to put lipstick on a fucking pig.
Looking on the ballot right now, it goes, whoa, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what we want America to do. And as you point out, while he's doing that, appeasing North Korea, he's threatening to bomb the shit out of our ally Oman. Make it make sense.
Yeah. President Trump threatened to bomb Oman, a U.S. ally, if it, quote, gets in the way of his administration's own talks with Iran, Fox News reports. The U.S. and Oman have been negotiating separately with Tehran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. It has been largely closed for 6 months. A reporter for Fox said the U.S. president made the threat to Oman while using an expletive during a phone interview.
Who have we become? I mean, I'm sorry. Have we become this, and this is a rhetorical question, this predatory imperial power where the president of the United States is basically talks about, I'm going to take over this country. I'm going to insult this country. I'm going to bomb this country if they don't do what I want. I mean, there's a weird moment. And again, this goes back to who he surrounded himself with, sitting around the table with Natalie Harp and Stephen Chung and Stephen Miller and Pete Hegseth. Does anybody say, Mr. President, the optics of this are terrible. Our men are suffering on the aircraft carriers. We're abandoning our allies. We're not winning this war. No one is telling him this. I mean, you and I are living in a world where we see these polls. He's living in a world where the omnipresent Natalie Harp walks around with a little, portable printer that just constantly feeds him how wonderful and great and omnipotent and omniscient he is.
Yeah.
And we are seeing the fruits of that every freaking day.
This is an interesting point, which is that there's not really a feedback mechanism, right, to market correct. So, like, if you win the presidency, the next real empirical test you have are the midterms, assuming you care about the midterms. And with Trump, who knows, but historically they do. And then you've got 2 more years until the next election. Now, most presidents have been very concerned about their public image, about winning the news cycle, which they deem to be getting good publicity, not just publicity. Winning, special elections, getting primary candidates elected, accomplishing, legislative goals, legislative accomplishments. But they've got like a scoreboard, right? And polling, I think. What are your approval ratings? That would be like considered a very important part of sort of keeping track. And it's sort of like a business, right? I mean, you don't wait 4 years to decide if it worked or not. You open a restaurant, pretty quick whether it's working, if you need to adjust the menu, lower prices. You're responding to market signals. There aren't a lot of market signals that Donald Trump is getting because he has created this world where he is like isolated from the market signals. So, for a normal president,
there's one market signal that he cares about, that he gets. How much money is he putting in his own pocket?
And everything's great. Winning.
He's probably focused on that, though. Absolutely. It's like there's just so much winning here because he and the Trump crime family, are making out billions of dollars. And this was just in year 1. So my guess is that in his own mind, he's thinking, this is going pretty good. All that other stuff is out. Those are other people. And, why should I care about that? Plus, when I go to Mar-a-Lago and I'm sitting around the table and everybody's a billionaire like me, everything is great, right?
And if we just fake it till we make it, positive thinking, speak of things that are not as though they were. Like if you just pretend things are great, then they are. This reality distortion field that he has. But Charlie, for a normal modern president, 33% would be we have to make some radical changes. And with him, there's no hitting the panic button. There's no meeting. He's not bringing in Dick Morris to we have to admit the era of big government is over, right? Like none of that. It's just things are great. Things are awesome. Keep doing what you're doing. And it won't really catch up to him ever, I guess, since he's not up for re-election.
Well, that's the other thing.
And since he can just say it was great and that he can just say he was the most popular president, he's immune from any sort of reality check because reality is what he says it is.
Right? See, isn't the whole system set up to prevent that kind of absolute unchecked megalomania? That's why we have the separation of powers, why we have checks and balances, all of that. And, what you're seeing here is a collapse of that in a way that the founding fathers did not. And we've talked about this before. When the Supreme Court, I think when historians look back on that Supreme Court decision that immunized him is going to go down as one of the great constitutional disasters. I mean, it will rank up there. Well, I'm about to be hyperbolic here, but I actually mean to be, with, the Dred Scott decision. I mean, this is one of those turning points. When did the country, hit that downward path so rapidly was, well, when you told the president that he could do anything and he was not accountable. That's number one. Number two, the decision by Republicans in Congress to turn the Article 1 branch of government, the co-equal branch of government, into a bunch of potted plants. And the fact that millions of voters basically said they just don't care about this stuff. So, I mean, all of that, there was a long debate for centuries about whether.
Yeah, that is what I've been kind of harping on. 77 million responsibilities for this president. And the thing is you can make the argument that, hey, it isn't so bad. We haven't hit rock bottom yet. Who knows where this shit is going to go? Donald Trump is an actual real wild card. And all I can say is he's old. He's not going to get more cogent or wise. He's literally on the North Dallas 40 or whatever the term is. He's not going to become a better president. He's old. So you can thank the Lord, Bobby, but you better thank the Lord for your tips because you will be able to afford gas to get to work. That's really President Trump did no tax on tips because he knew the price of oil was going to be jacked up probably forever. So now we know what you're going to be spending the no tax on tips on, Bobby. So congratulations.
Or not, and by the way, now I'm getting the word nerdy. I mean, go back to Plato and Aristotle, and they worried that all democracies end up as tyrannies. They thought it was inevitable and inexorable, that this was the fate. And so we've had political thinkers for centuries talk about, how do you keep a republic? How do you keep a democracy from degenerating into a kakistocracy or a kleptocracy or tyranny? And the founding fathers thought they had come up with a way of preventing that with these checks and balances. And so in real time, you and I are watching those checks and balances failing to be the guardrails that the founding fathers had put in because they feared exactly this scenario. And we're all surprised that this is happening in the United States because we thought we were immune from history, right? We thought American exceptionalism meant that all of the things that happened to Republicans and democracies before won't happen to us because we are special. Well, perhaps not.
I mean, I was surprised how quickly this happened, in the sense of, you know, like, we did a lot of things that should have or might have brought about, um, this situation. But for a long time, we seemed to get away with it. And so, like,
Yeah.
when Mitt Romney is your Republican nominee in 2012, you're not too concerned. When it's Mitt Romney versus Barack Obama, I think we got problems. But
John McCain. Yeah.
yeah, and then for it to go from Romney to Trump like that in 4 years, that is what really surprised me. How quickly
Well, but
that happened.
Well, say, having gone as dark as I just did, let's go back to your original point where we started this conversation. As you and I are speaking, Donald Trump's approval rating is at 33%. So perhaps there is a great awakening. My great positive hope would be, of course, that people relearn these values, like, that people who had taken like things like the rule of law for granted, who had assumed that we had that we had a republic, will wake up. My concern, of course, is that people will confuse opposition with the need to, blow everything up. That this discredits all liberal values, all liberal democratic values. That the corruption of the free market, the distortion of the free market, means that we ought to abandon the free market. These are massive mistakes, and I think they're dangerous. But hopefully, we'll see the people like, and I come back to John Ossoff. And by the way, the Democrats do have a lot of good people out there. We keep talking about AOC, we keep talking about El Sayed, and the reason I'm bringing them up is they can be very politically successful in their own world. But I'm thinking about 2028. What is it going to take to turn this around? Are you going to scratch your ideological id, or are you going to make the compromises needed to actually win a majority of the electoral college? And this is not an abstract concept. This is not you and I going back to our conservative Republican roots. We're just saying, what does it take to stop this particular Republican Party from absolute dominance for another generation? That's why we're having this conversation, people.
Indeed. Let's go, John Ossoff.
Well, for now.
Awesome, my friend. Well, we're up against it. Any other final thoughts or any words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with?
No, but I am looking for silver linings out there. I think that people ought to pay attention to the way the BBC is fighting back against Donald Trump's bogus libel suit against them. It's kind of illustrative of what it looks like when an institution or a media company actually says, "Okay, we are going to aggressively go on the counter offensive." And I also see that ABC is now suing to block the FCC's attempt to challenge their licenses. So maybe we, as Trump's popularity wanes, perhaps some of the people who had been cowering are going to realize, maybe we ought to stand up against this. Maybe we ought to find our backbones. And if so, that would be a relatively positive development. Don't you think?
Yes. Winning is contagious, so is losing. And so I think that it's important that Trump's approval rating goes as low as it can go. Some people are afraid he becomes a cornered animal. I think our odds are better when he is less popular and when the public is not with him.
I think both those things are true.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, Charlie. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Like, rate, review, support, subscribe, and join us back here next Tuesday. See you guys. Thanks, Charlie.
Right, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
All right. Well, that was somewhat of an abbreviated version of the the Trump news. So let's see. We got some news articles. This is not excuse me, this is not going to be that long a show, I don't think, because my son goes back to school tomorrow. So we gotta take him back. And I'm just going to leave it at that. So let's see. Where do we go from here? To Iran's secret plan to escalate the war. Let's listen to this.
After President Trump signed a memorandum of understanding with Iran in mid-June, administration officials fanned out to build support for an agreement they hoped would reopen the Strait of Hormuz and start winding down the war. Iran's hardline leaders huddled in Tehran and came up with a different plan, according to Iranian and Arab officials. In their view, the pact was likely just an attempt by the US and Israel to take pressure off the global economy and buy time for a bigger attack down the road. Instead of putting faith in talks, they took the past 2 months to prepare for a bigger fight. Their efforts include giving the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps more control of the country's regular army, appointing hardened veterans of the war with Iraq and past internal crackdowns to key posts, expanding domestic counterintelligence operations, and ramping up production of missiles and drones. The leadership quickly seized the initiative, attacking ships to tighten Iran's grip on Hormuz and expanding the battlefield to the Red Sea, which Saudi Arabia has used to get around Iran's chokehold on the Persian Gulf. Arab intelligence officials have picked up evidence, including communications between Iran and militia allies in countries such as Yemen and Iraq, of a strategic shift inside the country's hardline leadership to get their forces ready to widen the war and raise the costs for the U.S., officials familiar with the findings say. Alarming weaker Gulf countries like Kuwait, Iran's leaders are increasingly talking about offensive operations on enemy territory. Their overriding goal is to inflict enough pain to ensure the kind of attacks Iran has endured with the 12-day war last year and the continuing conflict aren't repeated. There is also a widespread view in Iran that the main war has not yet begun, said Mohammad Hassan Sangtarish, a Tehran-based defense analyst close to the Iranian government. What we have seen so far is increasingly interpreted through the lens of salami slicing, tactics, limited, incremental escalation designed to weaken capabilities before a larger confrontation. The Iranian preparations point to an enormous gulf between how Washington and Tehran are perceiving this stage of the war. The divergence has driven a hardline negotiating stance and reluctance to close deals by Iran's leaders that has persistently flummoxed Trump, who has called them crazy and accused them of lying. Iran's readiness to fight also highlights a deep lack of trust that is likely to keep the two sides from reaching a durable deal to end the conflict anytime soon. Iran's proclamations include plenty of bravado. The country's military and economic base have been battered by U.S. and Israeli airstrikes. More pragmatic members of the leadership, including Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, have repeatedly warned Iran needs to negotiate a deal to end the war that brings sanctions relief or face the collapse of its economy. But Iran is rebuilding its infrastructure and restoring access to missile bases much more quickly than expected, a concern to Israeli officials who are familiar with the progress. It also has successfully targeted U.S. bases and retains enough firepower to threaten ships and Gulf energy infrastructure. Arab officials are bracing for continued fighting and an extended disruption of energy supplies. For the regime, the baseline is war, said Alan Eyre, a former senior U.S. diplomat and nuclear negotiator with Iran. Iran will remain on a wartime footing, preparing for a subsequent attack. When Trump signed the Memorandum of Understanding with Iran on June 17th at the French Palace of Versailles, it looked like the biggest hurdle would be convincing American critics that it wasn't overly generous to Tehran. The deal promised sanctions waivers to let Iran sell its oil, access to billions of dollars in frozen cash, and the prospect of a $300 billion fund to rebuild the country. Iran's main obligation was to open the Strait of Hormuz to shipping traffic and then negotiate in good faith on its nuclear program. When Iran started shooting at ships the U.S. was guiding through the strait 3 weeks later in early July, it caught the U.S. by surprise. The very dangerous people from Iran, they're sick, said Trump, who also called Iran's leaders scum. There's something wrong with them. In fact, Iran was pursuing a two-track policy. While his diplomats pursued a peace deal with the U.S., Iranian leader Mojtaba Khamenei was taking steps to prepare the security apparatus for an expanded confrontation that may be initiated by Tehran itself. The Revolutionary Guard used the calm created by the Memorandum of Understanding to lay the groundwork with allied militias around the region to step up attacks if needed, sending advisors to Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon to discuss the plans. The officials familiar with recent Arab intelligence findings said. The intelligence, including intercepted communications, showed the Revolutionary Guard sending commanders to areas controlled by Yemen's Houthis to plan for a stepped-up confrontation with Saudi Arabia in coordination with Iraqi militias that also are backed by.
I'll just stop it there because I have a companion piece. What the? Oops. What the fuck did Trump get us into? Dude, Pete Hegseth needs to go immediately. So let me also, before I get into this, is going to piss some folks who are veterans off at least. Let's talk about the title of the show. I was watching, the Chocolate Earth Chanel Creative Solutions Ladies Show. I think they do it, mainly Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights. It's kind of late nights. And Chocolate said something. It was just a random comment, or she was addressing some old YN. And when she said it, I was half asleep, but it made me laugh. I can back up my nasty. So I don't think she actually meant it like, hey, you know what? I'm talking shit, about fighting. I can back up the fight. I think she meant it much more kind of provocatively. And the old YN, it was like somebody gave him a cold shower. He just backed the fuck down. Whereas somebody like me, dude, I would have stepped it up. It's like, okay, let's see where this is gonna go. So, I guess basically a lot of these little toothless boys are still babies. They're kind of cutting their teeth. They're teething on real women. And it is just a constant amusing. I cut it short today, or dropped it short today, about how masculine are panels of men talking about masculinity. My assessment is talking about masculinity means you're not masculine. Men don't talk about being manly; they just are. So, anyway, that is the origin of the title of the show. Salute to Chocolate Earth Foundation. It was a classic quote. And then, of course, I had to stick in the old Speak Radio. I think it was Speak Radio or Savage. I can't remember now. With that pimp Stanley thing, which I've never really liked, to be honest. However, it just worked for this particular show title. So I was kind of happy with it. So let's see. Let us watch this video. This I couldn't even make it through the whole video. I'm just like, nah, we need to watch this. We need to watch this with the audience.
There are a couple different ways you could look at the war right now. You could accept the White House's version. Donald Trump insists that Iran wants a deal and that the U.S. controls the Strait of Hormuz. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, says that negotiations with Iran are robust, and Trump is outright dismissing concerns about conditions on the USS Lincoln as fake news. On the other hand, you could choose not to accept the White House's version, which they are offering no facts to back up their views. Reports overnight say a ship was hit on the Strait of Hormuz, damaging the engine room and causing a crew casualty. The Wall Street Journal says American officials are worried Oman could help broker a nuclear deal that is more favorable to Tehran. That is on top of its reporting that Iran is looking to now expand the war, as Trump says Tehran should put up the white flag of surrender. And the Pentagon is now admitting that a Navy destroyer was without power for 4 days last month, leaving the crew without drinkable water, meals, running toilets, or air conditioning during that period of time. Joining me now.
I don't recall hearing about that destroyer hit. I've been on a destroyer, not in the Persian Gulf, but the Red Sea. I was on a minesweeper in the Persian Gulf. Holy fuck. Dude, I cannot imagine the misery of being out on the fucking water in the Persian Gulf with no power, no food, no AC. Do you know how fucking hot and humid it gets in the fucking Persian Gulf? Well, I do. And the Red Sea as well. Now, again, maybe I missed it in the news, but I didn't hear about this. Why didn't we hear about this? No toilets? Holy God.
Discuss David Rode, MS Now, senior national security reporter, and Peter Baker still here. Okay, David, day after day, the president keeps saying things like the Strait of Hormuz, it's open, everything is great, the U.S. is in control. And now we have another ship hit overnight and a crew member dies.
It is not open. The Trump effort to reopen it has failed. And then the other strait here, this is how the war is widening, is in the Red Sea. There's fighting there. It's another Wall Street Journal story about traffic being slowed down there. 4 sailors were killed on a ship in the Red Sea last week. So the president's narrative, according to the sources I'm talking to, and just basic fact, is false.
Peter, right now, Oman is negotiating with Iran over the strait. And in the midst of that, we talked about it yesterday, the president threatened to bomb the you-know-what out of Oman, a U.S. military ally, for almost 50 years.
We'll continue with this. Who in the audience heard about 4 sailors dying in the Red Sea and 1 sailor dying in the Persian Gulf? A fucking destroyer hit? The fuck? Okay, I must have missed this. And, I get busy every now and again. What in the hell is going on with this Donald Trump war?
I don't know how else to look at this, but that the United States is trapped in this war, and everything the president is saying and doing just isn't rooted in fact.
Yeah, it's so striking. You're right to point that out. We've gotten so inured to a president who is willing to say and sometimes do almost anything that somehow we've lost the capacity for shock. But in fact, to sit there and just sort of randomly, almost cavalierly threaten war against a country with which we have friendly relations is in fact a striking moment, and it tells us something that he wants to be belligerent with the countries that have been friendly to us. At the same time, he's once again talking about how he has such great respect for Kim Jong-un and North Korea, and he wants to stop military exercises because it's so mean to North Korea, which, by the way, has something like 60 nuclear warheads compared to 0 right now in Iran. And he says the whole point of the Iran war was to stop them from getting a nuclear weapon. Well, on his watch and on President Biden's watch, North Korea has expanded its nuclear arsenal substantially without any kind of action or, consequence from the United States. We have a president who seems to think that Kim Jong-un is his friend and Oman is not.
Okay, we've been talking about this for days. We've been covering this story on this network for weeks. We now have the families of sailors on board the Lincoln furious that the president is dismissing their concerns about the conditions on the ship, saying it's fake news. And now we learned that a destroyer was without power for 4 days. What is the American public supposed to make of this?
That the U.S. Navy is under tremendous strain, that previous administrations maybe didn't build enough ships, to be fair. But this is just an unforced political error by President Trump. There's no need to belittle these
going
sailors.
To war?
Well, there's the strategic error, but the
also an unforced political
correct.
error.
And sorry, just on Oman, they're angry at the Omani foreign minister. I interviewed him right before the war started. He said the Iranians are willing to negotiate. and the administration rejected that advice. This was February 27th. I interviewed the Omani foreign minister. He was leading the talks. February 28th, President Trump chose to bomb. So that's why they're mad at Oman. But it is a basic political error to belittle the families of sailors and belittle sailors who are out on these boats for 12 months at a time. And we are unable to resupply them. Why? Because Pete Hegseth hid the fact that Iran destroyed the main resupply base that the United States has in the Gulf. He did not make that public in press conference after press conference. And that is, again, the way that they have mishandled this war. But just why would the president belittle our service members and their families? It just makes no sense to me politically.
It's astounding. All right, Peter, new but related topic. Jared Kushner, who we just need to remind our audience, again, is not a government employee, just met with both Hamas and Netanyahu about the Gaza peace deal. Is there any indication that there was any progress? And of course, we need to remind our audience, Jared Kushner has had a very close relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu his entire life. As a child, when Netanyahu would visit New York, he would stay in the Kushner home in New Jersey in Jared's childhood bedroom.
Yeah, whether he resents losing his bedroom for that or not, we don't remember. But look, Jared Kushner is an odd figure here because you're right. He's not a government official. He's somebody who's in the private sector, who's doing business in the Middle East, has billions of dollars of investment from the Saudis, is running around the region, making deals. At the same time, he's serving as an effective envoy for the President of the United States to Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas, interestingly enough. Now, remember, it wasn't that long ago, you and I, that are old enough to remember when the president announced that he's got a deal between, Hamas and ending this Gaza conflict. That was so far ago that we can't even remember what that deal was like because the Israelis rejected it. Hamas didn't agree with our definitions, and that seems to now be off the table. So we're trying to get something back on the table. Now, it is interesting and important that the administration, in the person of Jared Kushner, is not giving up. It's still trying. It would, the question of whether they're committed to trying to find some sort of a peaceful resolution in the Middle East is important. And they should be, we should take note of that. But what Jared's doing and what he's offering, the different sides and what, authority he has from the President of the United States, his father-in-law, we don't really know.
Yeah, my question is he committed because he actually wants to help create peace in the Middle East? Or is it so he can get the bulldozers in there to create the Riviera a la Gaza?
Yeah. Well, consequently,
family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth. As the white left is jockeying for position and trying to secure as much political support as they can, there's been a lot of talk about the rise of the Democratic Socialist of America and how they've won some political races.
Yeah, we're going to save this one for later. There is a story that I had somewhere, and I thought I put it in the lineup. Donald Trump's approval rating down to 33%. Donald Trump is the single biggest reason at this point that Republicans are going to lose the House. This president done effed his own party, and keep blessing him. But I think the die is cast for this November.
Room with you. Does he go maggot on you a little bit sometimes?
So just to back up, he's been calling me maggot since February of 2022 when I had reporting that was coming in a book I wrote called Confidence Man about how he had been flushing documents down the toilets in the residence, and it was met with anyway. So there's been many posts like that. I think at least half a dozen. Jonathan and I have not actually spent a ton of time in this kind of a setting with him in this term. We've been, reporters at the pool with him. We've been at press conferences with him. this is a term where like everyone in Washington has his cell phone number, like way more than in term one. For what we do, we don't have, there has been news that has come out of people making those kind of phone calls. For us, he just controls the conversation inevitably. It's a 2.5 minute discussion. It reminds me of like how he was at the New York tabloids, which was he turns himself into a commodity and then he ends up just sort of being the master of the competition between news outlets. For what we do, we're not going to get what we need by having a conversation for 2.5 minutes that he controls. So we hadn't really spent a ton of time with him and we hadn't really talked to him very much one-on-one this term. It is true historically that he does not like one-on-one interpersonal direct confrontation. And so we had been asking for this interview since, I think it was since January. And, you know, our reporting was wrapping up, January of this year. Our reporting was wrapping up and we were getting nowhere through the press office. And everybody around Trump kept telling him, don't do this interview, don't do this interview. So we finally had to try him ourselves and texting him, calling, whatever. It took a few times until he finally directed his press aides to get us on his calendar. So we go on March 16th and there's a very long list of fact check questions. And we walk in and neither of us had been in the Oval since the goldifying of the Oval. And it's really overwhelming when you first walk in. And
pictures are crazy, so I can only imagine what it's like in person.
It was really like, it's, especially if you have sort of a sensory thing, it was really like, oh my God. And so we had heard that he was gluing gold challenge coins onto the doors and onto the walls at that point. And we actually saw them when we walk in because they were a bunch over the door leading into the Rose Garden, the colonnade. So we walk in, and normally when he does interviews like this, in both of our experiences, he'll roll pretty deep. Like you'll go in for an interview and there'll be like 7 aides on this side of his and then another 7. I remember an interview in 2017 where like the VP and Reince Priebus, then the chief of staff, walked in the middle. Gary Cohn was there for some reason. It was like it was just, it's like a cast. And this time that didn't happen. It was Stephen Chung, Caroline Levitt, and Natalie Harp again. And so we're looking around and he's not in there yet. And then he comes in and he's very polite and nice to see you. He shakes our hands. We're on day 17 of the war at this point. And so you would have thought he'd had like maps of the Middle East on the desk or
although the war that meant it was going to wrap up in
well, that's
10
true. It
days.
was going to be a quick war, but it was still happening despite the, it's not 10 days, not 2 weeks. He walks over to the Resolute desk and there's pictures of trees, maple trees. He says, I'm buying trees. I'm good at buying trees. He said, okay. And then under that is some pictures of the ballroom that he's building. And so he tells us how the columns on one side are supposed to be evocative of Rome and then Athens on the other side. And he's very happy that they're wider than the Supreme Court columns. But anyway, so that was about 15 minutes of what was an hour. And we knew that he had been talking to people about how powerful he felt he was at this point in his presidential arc, and that he had described himself to Tucker Carlson as the most powerful president there had been in the U.S. And so we asked him a version of that question. Do you said recently that no one would do the shit, no other president would do the shit you've done. Are you the most powerful president? And he sort of paused and he sat back and he thought about it. He said, it's very interesting. Natalie, go get okay. So he sends Natalie Harp to go get this 2-page printout that he says is by a historian who he was introduced to through Gary Player, the golfer. And the 2-pager, we get copies and he gets a copy. And the premise, the first paragraph is Donald Trump is the most powerful person who's ever walked the face of the planet. Oh. Okay. So, and then he's reading and it's what he calls the top 10. And the top 10 are Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun, Alexander the Great, William the Conqueror, the Caesars. And he says, because there's more than one, right? Tamerlane, Hitler, Mao, Stalin. I'm forgetting someone, Napoleon. At least Napoleon, but there's still, I think, another one. Anyway, and he's reveling in being in this company. The idea is that he's more powerful than they are. Not from a moral perspective. It's not, look at, what horrible crimes on humanity they committed. It's just that they had power. They are known throughout the centuries.
You know, this shiny objects thing that Palomino just said, dude, 77 million prospectors of fool's fucking gold with this Donald Trump presidency. Y'all are miners for fool's gold.
But that he has more. And then the other piece of this analysis was that we were supposed to understand that unlike some of these people, he has greater reach. He's got the reach of the U.S. military. He's got the reach of comms. He's got the reach of airplanes. He starts talking about planes. They didn't have airplanes back then, but that he's willing to use his power. And, you know, the whole point of the most powerful person ever to breathe a breath aside, a lot of this was our premise, which was that he was expanding power and seeing how much power he could amass and how radically he had remade the U.S. presidency. You know, the punchline was that it wasn't really a historian. It was Gary Player's caddy and business partner and associate. But nonetheless, it was a pretty remarkable moment. And I mean, Jonathan and I have both interviewed Trump a lot, as you said, and talked to him a lot. And this was, I think, the most memorable conversation either of us had with him. Maybe not for Jonathan as much as the eyebrows, but it was pretty standout. And then at the very end, to your question about the attacks, you know, he's perfectly happy. We're asking him questions about Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, who had brought the civil suit against him. I asked him why he calls her peekaboo when he had this weird answer that's in the book. We asked him about, you know, our reporting that that's in the book that he had told an advisor he wanted Todd Blanche, now the acting Attorney General, likely next Attorney General, to understand that he didn't care if James ended up being convicted in court on whatever charges they were bringing against her. I want to make her life miserable. That was the point, or I want to make her miserable. And so we said, you know, we understand you said this. And he said, no, I don't think so. But, you know, I would have. So, okay. And so he was very happy talking about New York, which is always like his happiest place. And then we were leaving and he invited us to stay for this press conference he was about to do. I think it was just an EO signing or something. He said he didn't really know what he was signing, but I do my own signings. And then when we were leaving, he looks at me and he says, you know, I know you're going to be critical, but people are tired of your bullshit. I'm paraphrasing. Bullshit was a quote. You know, you've been writing bad things about me for years, and essentially I win every fucking time. Isn't it time you tell the truth? And we said, thank you, and hope you read the book. Think you'll find it's an accurate rendering of your presidency. And then we left, and I have to tell you, his heart didn't really seem in it when he was doing this. It felt like he was doing it, frankly, partly for Stephen Chung's benefit.
All right. So, we are, that's confirmation that Trump is as bad as we thought he was. So, U.S. Border Patrol confiscates American traveler's boat and issues a $5,000 fine. Well, first off, I didn't know that the Border Patrol had boats. So I am trying to figure out what the violation was. I didn't read the article, obviously. Comply. He failed to comply with a something about warning recreational boaters that they must know these entry laws before embarking on their international water excursions to avoid serious consequences and hefty fines. So apparently this dude failed to report his return to the U.S. The fuck? Yeah. He just said, hey, you know what? I forgot to check in when I came back home. God damn, dude. This Trump administration is even the fucking recreational boaters are being harassed. Well, what's up with that, Bobby? Why? All right, so let's see here. Well, this is the excuse me, Christopher Rufo, and it's Brian Nichols who sent me a fucking hilarious video of Christopher Rufo. Just, dude, this James Lindsay, all these people, want to talk about cultural Marxism and all this stuff. Oh, they've gotten away from classical Marxism. Dude, it's pure culture war. Christopher Rufo and his ilk basically want to do a Be Brave. They're just Be Brave who read Plato, basically. It's a culture war. They don't care about Marxism or any of that stuff. They just want it Wonder Bread white. So don't let the cultural Marxism stuff, it's all just smoke and mirrors. We just want it white. We just want it Christian. And like Be Brave said during that debate that I showed yesterday, Black should be happy with second place. They're doing better than, the Africans they came from. That's pretty much the argument. So I have a huge problem with especially Black people who buy into this bullshit. And that's why people like CT or John Galt, they don't come to my panel because I will crush their spirit. Be Brave doesn't come to my panel. I want to crush his spirit. I want a tag on that casket going, I was crushed by Stanley versus the world. That should be his toe tag. So anyway, that is a bit dark, I admit. So let's go. Let's see what else is going on here. Again, Christopher Rufo. We're talking about Christopher Rufo. For some reason or another, my buddy Brian Nichols keeps sending me Christopher Rufo shit. The dude is not being honest about his intentions.
Counterattack on DEI initiatives. He's very much behind a lot of the demonization of critical race theory.
Critical race theory has become, in essence, the default ideology of the federal bureaucracy and is now being weaponized against the American people.
He claims CRT is actually a revolutionary program that would overturn the principles of the Declaration and destroy the remaining structure of the Constitution.
And he built that into a series of campaigns. They've actually changed policy. It's very influential in Ron DeSantis' governorship and kind of running Claudine Gay out of Harvard.
Pushing out Claudine Gay, toppling the president of Harvard, for a journalist like me is a big win.
Then in Donald Trump's second term, quite a lot has come out of Rufo's work, for better and from my perspective, for worse. From a lot of Trump's early executive orders.
We've ended the tyranny of so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion policies all across the entire federal government and indeed the private sector and our military.
To some of the work that led to the ICE and CBP deployments to Minnesota.
This week, I published an exclusive story exposing the Somali fraud rings in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which are stealing billions of dollars from American taxpayers.
Whatever else you want to say about him, Rufo has quite significantly affected the world we live in. He's also, if you listen to him, and he's a very, very smart and often quite honest analyst of his own side. One thing I appreciate about Rufo is he always says what he is doing clearly and in public. He seems uneasy.
Gone are the days when Tucker Carlson's nightly monologue set the agenda for the entire right.
You can feel a sort of disquiet a sense that maybe this right is not becoming what he hoped it would be.
Now we find ourselves in an escalating war of influencers trading conspiracies and counter-conspiracies.
That its attentional and informational sphere is polluted.
Driving the right into all different kinds of rabbit holes and dead ends.
That the administration is not getting as much done as he had hoped, intended, tried to help it do. And so I wanted to have Rufo on. Not because
Okay, here's the deal. It is an incompetent administration. I'm telling you right now, Rufo, if Rufo is not in this administration for a reason. Okay, he was especially Trump 1.0. He was a driving force behind this culture war, the whole CRT and woke thing. Why is Christopher Rufo not a part of this? I think it's because he knows this shit's gonna fail. Maybe he plans on running for president, but I can't ever see him as president. Bottom line is, if this administration is failing, it's because it's incompetent, and Rufo is one of the architects of the incompetence.
we agree on things, we obviously don't. You'll hear that. Not because I'm trying to talk him into my way of seeing things. I'm not going to do that. But both to understand how he understands what he is doing, and also to interrogate it, to ask if the tactics he is using are actually working, or if he's scoring short-term victories at the cost of helping to seed profound long-term problems. Rufo is a senior fellow and director of the Initiative on Critical Race Theory at the Manhattan Institute. He's a contributing editor of City Journal. He's the co-host of the podcast Rufo and Lomez, and he's the author of America's Cultural Revolution, How the Radical Left Conquered Everything. As always, my email, EzraKleinShow@nytimes.com. Chris Rufo, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you.
So I want to begin with a piece you wrote in early 2024 titled The New Right Activism, a manifesto for the counter-revolution. And there are a lot of interesting things in there, but the one I wanted to begin with is you write, no institution can be neutral. So tell me why.
Yeah, I mean, that's an obvious reality if you think about it for longer than a minute. And I think it's important to say because there's this mythology that we have in the United States, and it's a small L liberal mythology that institutions can be kind of neutral arbiters, that they could be valueless vessels that achieve some kind of pragmatic or instrumental ends. And my point is that no, in practice, institutions always have values, whether they're implicit or explicit. And for those of us who are on the outside of many powerful institutions, there's a lot of value in simply revealing the underlying reality. And in fact, political fights are at heart the fight for who determines the values, what values are installed in an institution, and then therefore what kind of decisions get made.
So I just take a lot of the arguments about institutions, particularly within like the broad philosophical tradition of liberalism, to argue that they can have neutral treatment. They can have neutral rules, and a lot of, for better and worse, procedure in these institutions, everything from notice and comment periods to different ways that they have to create transparency, are about trying to create that capacity for people to be neutrally treated. Do you think that's possible?
No, I think neutral is the wrong word. I think what we're looking for is impartial. And I would agree with that. Everyone should be treated equally as an individual under law. But that's impartiality, not neutrality. So in a criminal case, if you sentence somebody to the death penalty, you're not treating them neutrally. You're actually taking their life because the underlying law is a kind of moral code. And so I think neutral and impartial are similar, but in this case, kind of critically different.
So another argument you make in that piece is you say the popular slogan that facts don't care about your feelings betrays similar problems, that slogan being Ben Shapiro's slogan. In reality, feelings almost always overpower facts. Reason is a slave of the passions.
Yeah, that's true. And we'll caveat, we love Ben Shapiro. We're Ben Shapiro fans, of course. But I think that he's very wrong on that. And I think conservatives have made a fundamental error in latching on to that. And really what it is, it's a rationalization for losing. It's like, yes, we may have lost the great political question, which operates on emotions or passions. But, we have the facts on our side. And if only people would read our, white paper, our kind of regression analysis, our rigorous logical argumentation, then we would be vindicated. But look, while we should have the facts on our side, while we should use logic, by itself, it's insufficient. And in fact, politics operates on a deeper level, an emotional level, and politics occurs on the field of sentiment and public opinion, much more on the field of kind of abstract argumentation at the top.
So, and then you go on in the same piece to make an argument for agitprop. So agitprop, old Soviet Union term for agitation and propaganda.
Yeah.
Mashed up together. And it doesn't have a great reputation. Agitprop is usually not a term of endearment, but you say agitprop doesn't mean sacrificing the truth, but rather channeling the truth toward victory. So how do you define what agitprop is?
It is so funny to hear all these people like a Christopher Rufo and his number one biggest fan, Brian Nichols. You try and pin them down. Well, are you a progressive? What are you? How do you define yourself politically? I remember there was this dude, one of the, after I got into CT show, every now and again, probably once or twice a week, if not sometimes every day, I'd get up on the panel. I was a token liberal. And there was this black dude. And I was just listening to him talk. And finally it came to my turn. And I just started asking him questions because I'd actually been listening and reading his comments. So I just kept asking him, well, what are you? What do you believe? Well, because I guessed just by what he was saying. As it turns out, the motherfucker was basically, a black Nazi. Basically like a hood-servative, and it wasn't hood-servative, by the way. You got all these motherfuckers who are black, it's not, dude, y'all are freaks. If you are a black American and you're a fan of Hitler, you're a motherfucking freak. And I dare your ass to come up on this panel so you can get some of this treatment. You're a fucking freak. So a lot of these people who are saying, well, I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. John Galt does that shit. He's a goddamn Nazi. Okay. These people are weirdos. That's why they can't tell you who they are. Because if they did, it'd be a turnoff. I know this. I listen to people. Brian, I'm not calling you one, but you don't seem to know what the fuck you are. But you come into this chat, big upping Trump. Where are you politically? What do you believe in, Brian Nichols and others? Dude, do you honestly think that I don't notice that you're scared to plant your flag? I do notice.
And what are you trying to explain to your fellow conservatives about how to use it?
So, right. I mean, if you're conducting, say, propaganda on behalf of a falsehood or evil or an unjust cause, it's bad. My point is that that's not always necessarily true if you are pursuing a cause that is good and true and beautiful. If you look at the word propaganda, the original meaning, it comes from the Catholic Church, and it was the propagation of the Gospels, the propagation of the truth. And so these are concepts that we can recover, because the reality is that all politics in the age of the printing press and onward depends on propaganda.
And how do you define what propaganda itself is?
Propaganda is simply the method of communicating a political narrative. Again, we're using neutral, I'm going to say a true narrative, to a mass audience through the means of modern media. It's a rhetorical argument intended to persuade the majority of people to cobble together a majority of public opinion. And look, this is, again, for conservatives especially, not new. The founding fathers of this country wrote to each other about this. They wrote in public about this. We seem to have forgotten some of these lessons of how politics actually works. You have to persuade people. What is persuasion? It's rhetoric. What is rhetoric at an industrial scale? It's propaganda.
You've been connecting the question of propaganda to whether or not the end it is aimed at is true. How do you think about when you have untrue propaganda unleashing intense passions?
That's bad.
Towards a true aim.
Yeah, look, I don't think that that's good. I think that Aristotle has a great line in his book on rhetoric where he says, the truth has a tendency to prevail. I love that. I love that because it's like, the truth doesn't always prevail. We can look through history. We can look at history, and sometimes lies prevail. I think in 2020 and to 2024, during the woke era, many lies prevailed. But what is so interesting about that line is the truth has a tendency to prevail. And what I take from it is that, therefore, you always want to be on the side of the truth, even for your own pragmatic political ends. You always want to be on the side of the truth. And so, look, certainly there are untrue elements or narratives on the right and on the left. I think a political movement to succeed has to have the discipline and integrity to go after it, but always to remember that if the truth has a tendency to prevail, that's where you want to be.
And then your piece builds to this idea that, quote, in order to realize the ultimate promise of the political, there also must be something higher, a telos, which is the Greek word for something like an ultimate end.
A final cause.
A final cause.
Yeah.
So one reason I've been focusing on this piece is to understand the way you do your work and what your work is. So what is your telos?
Well, politically speaking, let's leave it at that.
Yeah, I don't mean your family.
Yeah. I mean, I think I want to have a restoration of the principles of our republic. And so if you're thinking about our republic, you're thinking about those guiding principles, where they have strayed over the last 250 years. I want to have a restoration of that. And so I'm constantly looking backward at the founding and trying to understand it better and understand how to bring those principles.
Yeah, that's that Claremont shit. The guiding principle of the founding was protecting the elites, giving the demos just enough power so they don't do a whiskey rebellion. But those principles were a strict hierarchy. Okay. And that's, again, Rufo does, and I haven't read that much by Rufo. He's got a book, and I guess I might even own it. Just never got around to reading it. Bottom line is, these people aren't being absolutely honest. They want a hierarchy. Be brave. They want what Be Brave wants. Be Brave is just stupid enough to say it out loud, so he is just hated and ostracized. The smart whites, they're not going to be as brutally honest because they have shit to lose. Be Brave does not.
Forward. And so you want to have the principles of liberty and equality. You want to have a functioning, healthy republic. And you want to have a culture that is organized according to virtue. And in particular, the virtues of our Western Anglo-American civilization. And through my personal observations around the world, as well as my study of the past, I think the Anglo-American civilization, the principles that have animated our republic for the last 250 years are still the best that we could hope for.
So from that perspective, we're 17 months into Donald Trump's second term. Is
that all?
It
feels like longer.
Tell me about it.
It feels like longer for you guys.
Is
probably.
this administration building the kind of country you want to see?
Yeah, I think so. And here's how I would assess it. On the elements within Article 2, so the executive power, I think Donald Trump has done almost everything he could do. Great people with the administration have done almost everything they could do to advance this kind of vision of the country. And
Liberty, equality, virtue.
Yes. And I think that the momentum was strong year one. I think it's trailed off in year two. And, could that be the executive has lost some of its energy? Yes. Could it be that, public opinion has softened? Yes. Could it be some of the foreign adventures or misadventures, depending on who you talk to, have distracted focus? I think yes. But ultimately, the problem is that the president has a majority in Congress, but not 60 votes in the Senate. And so fundamental transformative legislation that I would like to see is impossible.
Make the case to me that Donald Trump is restoring virtue.
This is a hard case because what you're going to say is that Trump does not exhibit the kind of Christian virtues in his personal.
See, much like some folks in this chat, you can't fucking answer a direct question. Okay, you gotta prevaricate, you gotta circumnavigate. I bet Rufo does not ever answer this question.
Life, right?
I'm not even thinking about his personal life. I'm thinking about his public life.
Okay, well, you tell me.
I didn't claim he exhibits virtue. So you said that they are doing a pretty good job bringing back liberty, equality, and virtue.
Correct.
Make the case to me.
Sure, I'll make you the case, and I'll make it through the particular example that I'm most familiar with. So, one of my big campaigns the last couple of years was the fight to abolish DEI. And so DEI was this idea that had been kind of germinating in the 90s, in the 2000s, but really exploded into public life with universal adoption by most large institutions after 2020. And it was this idea that's very simple, that there are oppressor groups and oppressed groups in the United States because of the historical realities of our country, and therefore to achieve to move towards equal outcomes, you have to treat individuals unequally according to their group identity. And the president on day one issued an executive order that was very much in line with the work that we have been doing to go and kind of wipe out the DEI bureaucracy throughout the federal government. And so in that case, I think that you could argue that the principle of equality and impartiality, as we were discussing earlier, had been restored, not totally. We still have some problems with the underlying statutory law. Just recently, in the last couple of weeks, the Department of Justice has taken a buzzsaw to so-called disparate impact doctrine. Same idea. If there are unequal outcomes, it must therefore, by definition, be because of discrimination.
Nope, that's not quite right. That's your interpretation. But no. That's not what it assumes. It literally just assumes they're disparate outcomes. Let's figure out why. Might be racism, might not be.
And therefore, you have to remedy it by treating people unequally. And so in this case, I think, and because this is the issue I've worked on and have been passionate about, I think that you can make an argument that liberty, equality, virtue have been restored. Are there other problems? Of course. Are we all the way there? No. But on the issues that I personally care about, that I personally have worked on, I think the country is in a much better place than it was 2 years ago.
I guess one thing I think about when I think about Donald Trump and virtue is corruption. So I see Trump taking luxury aircraft from Qatar. I see his family getting involved in all kinds of crypto schemes where the investors in their crypto schemes in many cases seem to be people who have business before the family, business before the country. The New Yorker sort of did I think a quite conservative tallying up of how much money the Trump family and Trump have made or how much the net worth has increased that has been connected to the presidency. The number was about $4 billion in this term. It doesn't, when I look at it, look virtuous.
Yeah. Look, here's my general perspective, and I'll lay it out to you as honestly as I can. there are the issues that I work on, that I'm passionate about, that I feel like I have some control over or influence over. And there are the issues that I don't. And I think I've been very straightforward in the areas where I think the administration has fallen short. And certainly the perception, and we'll see over time, I'm sure that there will be, inquiries, investigations, et cetera, into these business enterprises, is bad. You're not going to get me to defend it. I'm perfectly happy calling out the administration where I think it's strayed or erred. And this is one of those places. I mean, I remember the crypto launch. It was during the transition, I think, where they launched the Trump coin, right? And it's like, I don't like this. I don't want to see this. They shouldn't be doing that. And yeah, you're not going to get me to defend it.
Well, one of the things I'm touching into here is I've been watching a show, and I see a growing vein of discomfort from you on at least what parts of the right are becoming.
Sure.
So in December, you tweeted, "The right's media apparatus is how the right teaches its followers how to think. And it's currently getting consumed by conspiracies, psychodrama, and tabloid conflicts. If left unchecked, it will turn the audience into the equivalent of a third world click farm." So tell me about that. What's been alarming you?
Yeah. Sometimes, man, you hear your quotes back, so you're like, oh, that's kind of very, 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 very lively language. Yeah, this is a huge problem. And so I'll put it this way. There's a growing split between the institutional right and the online right. The institutional right, I think, actually deserves credit for gatekeeping some of these kind of bad tendencies out of our institutions, and I think that's good. However, the online
right being like Fox News and
conservative think tanks, the Manhattan Institute, all of the kind of the institutional layer of the professional right, let's say. I think it's done a very good job at gatekeeping some of these bad psychological and political tendencies out of our institutions. The problem that we're grappling with, though, is that the traditional way of thinking about political media is always as an outgrowth of institutions. So you'd have your magazines, your newsletters, your think tank, policy papers. The internet has created, kind of benefits, costs and benefits. One of the benefits is the kind of ease of communication with a large audience. But one of the negatives is that you have the proliferation of insanity, madness, psychopathology. And on the right, I think this went into hyperdrive after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Was bubbling up before then, but really then took a turn. And so you have this tendency on the right, historically. You have like a kind of Bircher tendency in the post-war era, and then it kind of waxes and wanes over time. And right now you have, in the online right, someone like Candace Owens, who has like departed so far from reality and yet has a massive audience. And I think that it's doing a disservice to the public, and even more, say, kind of self-interestedly, doing a very grave disservice to the right, because if you can't teach your audience, your followers, your political base how to think properly, they're not going to behave properly, and you're not going to have proper outcomes. And so I think it's important for us on the right to have this internal fight, which is to say, if you think that, Israel assassinated Charlie Kirk, or, whatever kind of handful of conspiracy theories you have, you're on the outside. You're not within the movement. And this is a fight that is happening now. And I think given sufficient amount of time, I think we'll win.
Why do you think you'll win? Because I look at the right and I see Tucker Carlson and his current guise, which is a much more conspiratorial guise than he's had before, has become more and more dominant figure. As you note, Candace Owens' success has been startling. I guess I'd ask this question in two dimensions. What is the audience demand that they are meeting? Right? What is it that they are providing that people want? And then I guess the second question is, why do you think you'll win?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, the audience for conspiracy theories is enormous. Before his kind of legal trouble, someone like Alex Jones was making apparently millions of dollars selling vitamins and survival supplies. And if you think about it, to generate that kind of revenue requires a massive, if kind of quiet, under the surface audience. And so I think they're really tapping into that side of the audience. It's right wing, but not exclusively right wing. And in fact, a lot of the people who have come over to these conspiracy theories are in that part of the horseshoe where their politics are, let's say, sub-ideological. They're more of a feeling, a perception, a set of resentments. Second, how do conspiracy theories work? Conspiracy theories work for people who want to forfeit agency, for people who do not see the possibility of constructive action in their personal lives or in public life. And therefore, the conspiracy theory gives them the rationalization and justification for their nihilism. It's, insert here, right? It's this group, it's that group, it's this other group that is controlling the world, making everything impossible, assassinating our heroes. And this gives them a psychological key, right? That is self-reinforcing, because a conspiracy theory for conspiracy theorists can never be debunked, right? It's just one layer of the onion that gets peeled. And I'll tell you why I think we're going to win. Because I've noticed this, even for people, let's say, in my kind of 1 degree of separation, conspiracy theories, and I think in particular anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, eventually fry your brain. And so I think that we'll see a lot of these personalities, a lot of these psychological tendencies kind of burn out on their own. And on top of that, as a kind of extra layer of confidence.
That is an optimistic view on the history of anti-Semitism right there.
Yeah, well, okay. I'm saying in the near term, these things kind of wax and wane. But I think what I've seen in the United States is a greater set of antibodies than you might find elsewhere. And then institutionally for our side on the right, I think that, look, the people who run institutions are aware of the problem. They're confronting the problem. We're dealing with it. And to me, this is inevitable. Political coalitions are going to have some kind of mixture of the good and the bad. And the question is, who's in a position of leadership? What kind of courage and integrity do they have? And can they succeed? And so I think that when I look at the field as it is, I think this, say, faction is less powerful than it was 6 months ago, a year ago, and I hope that trend continues.
I think there's an interesting question on institutions in the right here. I forget if it's a Chesterton quote or a C.S. Lewis quote, but one of them says that when men stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing. When men stop believing in God, they believe in everything. And I do think there's a dimension of that around institutions where the right has become much more anti-institutional. I think the view that institutions cannot be neutral and largely cannot even be impartial is much more widely held. And there's been a sort of coordinated attack on many of the institutions in American life. But sort of new ones haven't emerged, right? You could imagine the right and the left having parallel institutions that have different core values, because I do agree with you, actually, that institutions they do always have values at their heart. And when you don't think they do, it just means you don't know what they are.
Correct.
But I think
they're being deliberately obscured, right?
Or they're being obscured.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes I think Tucker Carlson is an interesting figure here, somebody who came up institutionally. I think sometimes about this speech he gave at the 2009 Conservative Political Action Conference.
And I saw conservatives create many of their own media organizations, and I saw many of those organizations prosper, and I saw some of them fail. And here's the difference. The ones that failed refused to put accuracy first. This is the hard truth, and conservatives need to deal with this. I believe this. I'm as conservative as any person in this room. I am literally in the process of stockpiling weapons and food and moving to Idaho. So I'm not in any way going to take a second seat to anybody in this room ideologically. But I will say, honestly, if you create a news organization whose primary objective is not to deliver accurate news, you will fail. You will fail. The New York Times is a liberal paper, but it's also, and it is to its core a liberal paper, it's also a paper that cares about whether they spell people's names right, by and large. It's a paper that actually cares about accuracy. Conservatives need to build institutions that mirror those institutions. That's the truth. You don't believe me?
So put aside the special pleading for the New York Times here. Carlson tried to build his own media institution, the Daily Caller.
Sure.
I would say it did not. My impression of it is that it did not become a place that put accuracy first and became a kind of conservative New York Times. And
it did not become a conservative
New York Times. Over time, he went in, I think, darker and darker directions as he chased the audience. And now he's fully without institution. and has, I think, emerged, I'll put it this way, into a form I think when I listen to you, you find more concerning and problematic. So what do you think went wrong there?
Yeah, well, look, this is a long-term trend. This didn't emerge in 2009 or 2020. I think of it this way. The left is over-institutionalized and the right is under-institutionalized.
I say this all the time, man. Left is overformed by institutions, the right is underformed.
Correct. And so we have kind of opposite problems. And I think of it also in this way. I wrote a piece about this, I don't know, a long time ago, and I think it really holds up. The left is organized as a capital P party, and the right is organized under a capital P prince. So you have Donald Trump essentially sets the direction of the right, for better or for worse, through personal charismatic power and his relationship with the conservative base. There's really no mediating institutions in the kind of way that you would see elsewhere. That's where conservatives have figured out this formula, for at least the time being, to achieve political victory. It has benefits, it has problems. The left has the opposite problem. The reason why I think you get like presidential candidates on the left that seem to be like devoid of traditional charisma is because it's organized as an institutional apparatus or a capital P party. And so conservatives have a problem with institutions. Conservatives have a problem building institutions. And this is the deepest irony, right? Is that conservatives in a healthy republic would be the ones that are preserving the institutions, restoring the institutions, maintaining the institutions. But conservatives have found themselves on the outside of institutions. And so when we're talking about this concept of counter-revolution, it's a paradox, right? Because a counter-revolution is not necessarily a conservative impulse on the top. You can have a conservative mission or goal that drives it. That's why it's a counter-revolution rather than a revolution. But conservatives are in this really interesting position where you have a lot of people on the intellectual right. They attend the black tie galas, they attend the events at the country club, they eat the, salmon dinner at the whatever Hilton, ballroom. And I'm always looking around at these, I don't like these events because I'm always looking around and saying, you guys are out of your minds. You guys are operating as if, the Elks Lodge was still the formative institution of the United States. You're living in a fantasy. You're living in a nostalgia that isn't actually grappling with the fundamental problems in the country and is totally out of step with the very voters that you claim to represent. And so, look, this is a problem. I can't say that there's a snap your fingers solution. And so you have to start where you start. I work for an institution that I think is the best in the business, the Manhattan Institute. I think we do good work that has a high degree of accuracy and rigor and intelligence. And I think that we've put up practical political victories in a way that few others have.
Another version of this is a line I like, is that the personality type of the left is bureaucratic and the personality type of the right is autocratic. And I don't think that was always true.
I don't think so.
Give you a response.
I don't think so.
I think in the Trump era it is.
Okay, well, make the case.
There is a falling in line behind Donald Trump. So here's my view of the two coalitions right now. The genius of Donald Trump in the 2024 election was he collapsed the multi-dimensional test of party loyalty that existed in the previous Republican Party, where you pro-life, did you believe in low taxes, what was your foreign policy, et cetera, and certainly the multi-dimensional agenda test you see on the left, down to a single point of loyalty. Did you support him personally? If you did, there was actually room for a wide variety of other opinions. You could be a techno-futurist,
a podcast
like Elon Musk.
Yeah.
You could be a Christian traditionalist. You could be RFK Jr., who'd been running as a Democrat just a year or two before. But also you could be Ted Cruz. And what held that together is that the line that you could not cross was Trump himself. But as long as you were useful to him, you could be on the team. Now, that has obvious issues when you move into governance, and I think some of them have emerged. But it gave him and them a freedom of movement across other issues where, you know, a Kamala Harris, a Tim Walz, Joe Biden were much more box checking, right? This sort of multidimensional loyalty test that the left uses. And so on the left, you end up with, and I mean here the left, not like the Democratic Socialist left, but the left coalition in this country,
Sure.
the broad Democratic Party. You end up with people who have sort of all of the right views and
Yes.
have an institutional personality, right? Are somewhat risk averse, are worried about getting in trouble at a meeting. And on the right, you have people who they'll go crazy in a meeting. You can be Bill Pulte, but as long as the boss likes you, you're safe.
Okay, yeah, I think that there are elements of that that are true. Prince versus party. It's a method of political organization, psychological organization. Certainly, one of Trump's kind of the great litmus test for him is personal loyalty. Like we've seen that. You're with Trump, he's with you. You cross him, and he'll attack you.
You could be Kim Jong-un and be a.
They were buddies, right? It
Standing.
was like a nice buddy comedy.
Yeah.
I feel like there'd be a buddy comedy.
He likes Kim Jong-un more than he likes Mark Carney.
Yeah, well, you know, fair enough. And as personal chemistry goes, but yeah, I think there's some truth to that, but I wouldn't therefore, I think your conclusion is overdrawn. I don't think you could say the right has autocratic personalities. I mean, I deal with conservatives all the time. I don't see that as a psychological tendency with the people I work with, the people I talk to, my friends and neighbors. But so, yeah, I think it's overdrawn. I think this is just a question of political organization from the top. And I don't think it's total just loyalty, personal loyalty. I mean, Trump wants immigration restrictions, strong national borders, build a wall. He wants kind of American national interest-based foreign policy, although that is kind of a little bit on the outs. And then he represents, or at least championed, a lot of the causes that I care about, you know, on DEI, on higher education, on cultural institutions, you know, and a whole host of other sub issues that he really grabbed onto. And look, this is good. You kind of have to work with what is there. You always want to plan for the future, build for the future, but ultimately you're faced with decisions in the moment. And look, on the whole, I think in those areas where we have had more freedom of movement, more ability to execute policy, I think things have been going quite well.
I'm going to go back to Tucker. So I've seen you talk about your take on his evolution. And something you've said is that the Tucker Carlson of the Fox News era, when he was given his 8 p.m. monologues, that in that era, they were a unifying script for the right. That Fox News was this institutional structure around him that maybe contained him to a certain point. And that created a unity, a coherence that has now dissolved, not just around him specifically, but around the right more broadly. Now, the liberal take on Tucker in the Fox News era is that he was beginning to bring a white national strain into centrality in the Republican Party. That, you know, there were all these Daily Stormer articles about how much he was saying exactly what they thought. He was talking about great replacement theory.
And you've got to ask yourself, as you watch the historic tragedy that is Joe Biden's immigration policy, what's the point of this? They are flooding this country with immigrants in order to change the demography to maintain political power for themselves, to change the racial mix of the country. That's the reason, to reduce the political power of people whose ancestors lived here and dramatically increase the proportion of Americans newly arrived from the third world. Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it. That's true.
He had already, in our view, become quite conspiratorial, and that what he is now and what he is then are a straight line from each other. And that the sort of passions he was unleashing, right? Reason, of course, being a slave of such passions, that it was always going to go in one direction. And that celebrating what he was at that moment and then being confused by what he is at this moment is a kind of like a strange unwillingness to either grapple with one or the other. So tell me how you see it.
Yeah, I don't see it that way. I mean, when Tucker was on Fox at that 8 p.m. Eastern time, 5 p.m. Western time for me, it really did feel like a shelling point for the right. It was like a quarterback calling the plays every night at 8 o'clock in that first, 5 to 10 minutes, where Tucker kind of condensed the opinion, represented the opinion, reflected back the opinion, and then everyone had a central point, a central coherent point to think about, to talk about, to mobilize on. And it was very effective. So even in my own experience, when I first started reporting on critical race theory in the institutions, went on Tucker, gave a kind of opening monologue with Tucker, President Trump was watching it, got a call from the White House the next morning. Hey, the president saw you on TV. He wants to take action on critical race theory. Come to the White House. Let's get this thing done. And so that mechanism, that even in my personal experience, the loop on that was like less than 12 hours.
Very tight loop.
A very tight and the White House. And I think also what I've learned about Fox News is that Fox News has, and this is to its great credit, Fox News has a kind of disciplinary function. And I think especially after 2020 has become even more cognizant of, okay, message discipline is important. Moving the message forward is important. Here's the kind of guardrails for the narrative. And this is a function of institutions, a function of technology.
Yes, but what I'm talking about is what the narrative itself is. I agree with you that Tucker played this role when he was on Fox News. But the thing that many of us who, I knew Tucker before, many of us who had watched him for a long time from Good Time Libertarian.
But what specific you're invoking like the Daily? It's like I don't know anything about the Daily Stormer beyond.
He talked a bunch about great replacement theory. This has been been exhaustively documented. There are biographies of the guy. The Times did a bunch of work on this. The bringing in of a macro narrative that there was a function, I would call it a cabal of elites importing brown voters to replace you. That you are being betrayed by elites representing foreign interests and foreign people to sort of alter the culture of this country to their benefit was something he hammered all the time.
Fox News is reporting tonight that the administration awarded a $172 million grant to a George Soros-linked organization which exists to, quote, help young border crossers avoid deportation. Now, why is some foreign-born billionaire allowed to change our country fundamentally? That's the big question.
Right, a relentless focus on crime from immigrants, a relentless focus on George Soros. And so to me, I see Tucker now and I see Tucker then. And I agree, the shackles are off a little bit. But I see him calling the same play. He's just had to turn up the dial a little bit because he doesn't have Fox News.
I don't think that's right. And I think let's take you're presenting it in a way that is very charged. I don't think quite fair. But let's take the underlying.
Tucker's a charged figure.
But let's take the narrative that you're portraying. I don't think that's exactly how I would put it, certainly. But the underlying facts are either true or not true. And in this case, mass demographic change has been and is a reality in the United States. And I think it's fair to talk about that politically. We've been talking about it politically for 10 years. And you could do it in a way that exemplifies bigotry or discrimination, of course, but you can also do it in a way that isn't an expression of bigotry or discrimination, but in fact is just a basic question, a question that that people in the United States have been asking since the 1770s. Who are we? What is an American? And if we are a sovereign nation, we have not just the right, but really the obligation to determine these great questions of who comes in, who doesn't come in. And so I don't think that it is right to say that someone who is concerned about rapid and large-scale demographic change is kind of a white nationalist. That seems like the kind of
No, I'm
smear.
saying that the reason I think Tucker is a white nationalist is due to all the white nationalism. Well, let me ask a question. Let me ask a question fairly.
No, because that is a huge charge. And I just, again, like, what is the evidence of that? You could be concerned. Can you be concerned about mass demographic change without being racist? I think the answer is yes.
How do you define a white nationalist?
Well, you make the charge, you define it and substantiate your point.
So I think that Tucker's view is that the
take Tucker out of it. Just make in general argument.
A general argument
and then you can kind of layer in Tucker.
So I think that there is a straightforward view in white nationalism, that there is such a thing as a white race. That race is fundamentally European, came here and founded this country. That race has, depending on the variant of white nationalism we're talking about, genetic advantages or cultural advantages, and that race deserves to have, should have dominance, particularly over this country. There are harder and softer versions of this, right? In some versions, Jews are included in that white race.
Sure.
In some versions, they're not included in that white race. In some versions, we are talking about something I would describe primarily as a kind of nationalism, right? If you have too much of a country not sharing a common heritage, you lose solidarity. In some cases, we're talking about something much darker than that, right? There are people who just don't like the way their community is changing, and there's the KKK, right? Everything exists on a spectrum. But
would you say someone who is, like, for example, hesitant about rapid, large-scale demographic change is just a kind of 1% white nationalist? Yeah, because that would be like the majority of the country.
Yes, I don't think it is a problem or unfair or even wrong to worry about large-scale rapid demographic change. So to be more specific about Tucker. So you just had on the right-wing writer Scott Greer. He's got a book coming out on the online right called White Pill. So Greer was a former deputy editor at the Daily Caller. He left in 2018 after past writings for a white national site were dug up. And he once said of Tucker, so this is Greer speaking, Tucker is ultimately on our side. He can get millions and millions of boomers to nod along with talking points that would have only been seen on VDare or American Renaissance a few years ago. These are both white national sites. So I guess what do you make of that?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I make of it. And here's what I think is really interesting about some of these figures who were on the once kind of fringe elements of the right, who have in some ways seen the errors of that way of ideological thinking. And to me, you always want to leave people room to grow up, room to leave bad ideas behind, room for kind of critical self-reflection, and then to integrate back into the kind of mainstream thinking. And I think, Scott Greer is interesting. And one of the reasons why we interviewed him was to kind of chart out this trajectory, which there's a lot of people that had more radical politics and then they moderate over time. And so I was very interested in understanding that process of kind of ideological development and growth, and then really scrutinizing. You want to actually try to figure out, all right, well, what's the way out of that? What's the way to demystify, to defang, to kind of delegitimize that way of thinking? And I think it's interesting to talk to people who once had those ideas.
So I'm not against you talking to him at all, right? What I'm saying is not that you shouldn't interview Scott Greer.
Sure.
I think many people change their politics dramatically. And one of the big problems the left actually has is not giving people space to change.
Sure.
And putting people into a box where they're held in who they were as opposed to who they may become. My problem is not with you interviewing Greer. I'm saying that I looked at Tucker in that period and thought, he's going in this direction that I understand this to be. The argument of, a VDare, and they all celebrated him. But I guess the question is whether, to phrase a question precisely, which maybe I haven't yet, whether one of the lessons of where he has gone and where some of the right has gone is that people like you on the right were a little insensitive to when something wasn't just a breaking of a liberal taboo, but was a movement towards a politics that was much more, let's call it, white identity focused.
Look, huge point. I would break it down in a couple ways. One, I don't think that's quite accurate. I actually think that the statement you're reading, and you could probably read it from a number of other people, right? If you remember in 2016, Richard Spencer famously held like some sort of conference or group, and he said, yes, Trump has adopted, Trump is a creation of the alt-right.
We willed Donald Trump into office. We made this dream our reality. And if we will it, it is no dream. A quote I'm sure our friends at the Anti-Defamation League know very well.
It was completely delusional, totally self-serving, and a product of narcissism that I wouldn't take at face value. And so I think a lot of the radical elements you're talking about overstate this relationship because they desperately want it to believe it. And I think that someone like Tucker, I don't think it's accurate to say that Tucker on Fox in 2021 was laundering in talking points from American Renaissance. I don't think that's true. I think it's conflating a kind of maybe superficial opposition to immigration. And the conflation game is really I think dishonest and unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm going to be ending this in the next few minutes. I'll probably maybe start the show with the rest of this tomorrow afternoon. But, sitting here listening to Christopher Rufo justify some of this bullshit, it reminds me of several people in the chat right now. Dude, tap dancing with ephemera, irrelevant points, and bullshit. Dude, I am very amused at people who continue to defend Donald Trump talking about his first term, which was so fucking bad that he didn't even get reelected. Dude, some of these two wings of the same bird, a pox on both their houses, people. It's because you can't fucking take a stand. I really don't like people who talk politics but can't fucking figure out which side of the aisle they'd rather reside. In the Navy and the military in general, I'm sure it's better to make a bad decision than no decision. And that two wings of the same bird bullshit is dithering. It's fence sitting. It's, I don't know how to make a decision. I'm not impressed. And I readily mock people who want to just toss that shit out there like it's supposed to be admirable. Well, I'm not a conservative or a liberal. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. Do you know how weak that sounds to someone like me? It's mockable, and I will do it mercilessly, especially in my chat. Dude, how about grow a spine and walk in a direction? Oh, fuck.
Fortunately, for a lot of time, it worked. And so I think that, in fact, we're in a much better place than in the past. And I remember some of these groups like ADL, SPLC, Media Matters, they came after me with many, many smears, trying to destroy my reputation, trying to get me deplatformed from social media, trying to kind of eliminate me from the public sphere. None of it worked, thankfully. The ACLU, I would also add. And in fact, as I look back, the arguments that they were making were preposterous, and they only succeeded because people felt fear. And so I'm glad that we don't live in that condition of fear anymore. And today we can talk very reasonably across the table, which I think is good. But I'm certainly not going to forget the emotional tone and the political vulnerabilities of that era. And again, the SPLC that was coming after me because of God knows what was at the same time giving money to neo-Nazis and white nationalists to keep them afloat. And what that shows me is that the supply of racism in the United States, and including racism on the right in the United States, has dwindled to such a small degree in real life that it took the SPLC to actually inject cash into that ecosystem merely to keep it alive. And so I just don't. Yeah,
you ever think
about
about
persuasive?
one way of thinking about that period that I think is how I think about it, is that two things were sort of true at the same time. So one, there was way too much speech policing. There was too much cancellation. There was too much that instead of being willing to have arguments, people just tried to make the arguments unhavable. That all happened, right? I don't deny any of it. And on the other hand, a lot of what people more on the left in that moment were afraid of or what they predicted also happened. The alt-right moved much more from the fringe to the center. I always think about
the alt-right was totally destroyed after Charlottesville.
I think maybe we have a different view of what the alt-right represented, which is fair enough. But I think a lot of ideas that were very, very, very far from the center. I think about Elon Musk and him writing. And I mean, later he had to like try to figure out how to apologize for this. But when somebody basically said like the Jews have been funding the Great Replacement.
Did Elon say that? Yeah.
No, Elon didn't say that. What he said was underneath that. He said to whoever had tweeted that, "You have spoken the truth." And then he had to go tour Auschwitz and things like that.
Okay. The Auschwitz,
the Auschwitz apology tour. So, but you know, even now, Musk is very conspiratorial, and where he is in 2026 now, the world's first trillionaire, owning what used to be Twitter, and the things he like kind of pumps into the attentional stream would have been considered incredibly marginal even in Trump's first term. So two things I think were true, right? I think there are many ways which the left went too far, and the forces the left was worried were there are much closer to the center. Yes, there are parts of the alt-right that are not significant today. Richard Spencer is not a significant figure. Nick Fuentes has a bigger audience than Richard Spencer ever did.
Sure.
And there is, I mean, when I'm on X and other places, the amount of just constant anti-Semitism and anti-Indian racism I see just happening in people's mentions is wild to me. And I mean, I don't think he'll win, but you look at Fishback, who's running for governor in Florida, it's sort of almost unimaginable to think of somebody like him being a figure in Republican Party politics who would be commanding the support of practically anybody. And I think the reason that people worry about him is they don't think he's going to win, but he seems to be doing very well among the young right.
Sure.
And so I think you can hold your view, which I at least partially share, that there are many ways in which the left and the speech policing and the boundaries went too far. And also a lot of the people who were most hair on fire in that period had a point, and some of their more kind of wild predictions. I was thinking about, like, if you had told me that Trump was going to make RFK Jr. HHS secretary and Tulsi Gabbard DNI, and try to make
the triumph of bipartisanship
and try to make Matt Gaetz attorney general, I would have thought that was like an unhinged, like resistant Substack take. And then it all happened. So it's like the fact that you can have these things be true at the same time.
Yes, I think you're kind of understating the dynamic on one side. I mean, it wasn't just about speech policing. After 2020, the left maintained a kind of apparatus of social annihilation. And I went through it myself. I had the ACLU subpoena me and harass me with a lawfare campaign that cost me a lot of money. I had the SPLC and the ADL put me on some sort of hate list that was totally bogus, trying to destroy my reputation. And so I had people, threats of violence against me that were very credible at the time. And so, people trying to get, going after my family, my kids. I mean, we shouldn't forget just how awful that period was and how insane that period was. And unfortunately, while I think that many of the institutions on the left have learned after having suffered some consequences for enabling that, the movements that they have sparked are in fact alive and well. And look, I think the difference that maybe you're not seeing is that the radical, nihilistic, and violent left-wing movements have the full support of the left's institutions. And what we're talking about is a radical, nihilistic movements on the right do not have any institutional support and are bubble up in your Twitter comments, which again don't agree, but is different in kind, not just in quantity. And in the case of someone like James Fishback, I think it's a great test. Fishback is very charismatic. I think we would all agree on that. I talked with your colleague Michelle Goldberg about this. But even with a kind of individual charisma, if he's like the Groyper candidate for governor of Florida, which is again like kind of a crazy thing that is happening, I want to see the actual vote tally, because that's going to show me where he is, where he stands with the actual conservative population, the conservative voter, the conservative movement as a whole. I suspect that he's going to get absolutely trounced. It happened with Vivek running against a guy, Casey Putsch, in Ohio. He got blown out by, 60, 70 points. And so by contrast, you look at something like the kind of trans ideological movement that I think is both kind of a lie. It's grounded in a series of falsehoods, maintained this suppressive, threatening, censorious power in the kind of pre-Elon Twitter days and in the general kind of woke years. And then look, another uncomfortable fact, per capita has committed more mass violence than any other group. And so I am willing to indulge in and think it's important to have a kind of criticism of, let's say, the elements on my own side. But I also think that if we were to just measure it out, to put it on a scale, it's looking a lot more like this: assassination's attempt against President Trump, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the kind of security posture that's required for conservatives just to go on a college campus. That's how I measure it. It's like I'm looking at it, I'm feeling it, I'm seeing it with my colleagues. After Charlie Kirk was killed, I called all the people, friends and colleagues in the business, and I just was completely distraught for weeks. And again, while I don't support James Fishback for governor, again, I think that it's kind of an empty symbolism. Whereas on the other side, it feels like these ideologies have the support of the institutions. They wielded power irresponsibly in the past and still have the kind of ultimate political threat of violence that I know everybody in my world has seen, has experienced, has feared. And so, that grounds me. Do you not see that? Is that
I don't have the same view of it, but let me hold as saying that your experience of it, I understand, right? And as somebody who also, sometimes deals with threats of violence and other things of that nature, I think the way this often looks to people on the left, particularly looks right now, is that when you say these nihilistic, I think you called them, ideals, ideas are not held at high levels of the right, they're only supported institutionally on the left, I see it the opposite way.
Really?
Right? I see it the opposite way, and I'll explain why. I don't see the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, as like a powerful, potent left-wing actor. They're not
really. They could 10 years ago they could nuke you. If they put you on their list,
I'll go through my thing.
Yeah.
ADL, I don't even see as on the left, which is a different question. I understand, but I see the Trump administration as powerfully and potently extreme and willing to use the power of the federal government, from deploying ICE and CBP agents to different cities, to directing the DOJ who to investigate and go after, to after Charlie Kirk's murder, trying to get people fired who are just sort of random people who had done shitty tweets. I do not see a world in which there is this huge separation between the extreme elements of the right and this administration. I keep hearing from people like you, right, who I think has talked about this, that there's a huge number of Groypers working in House and Senate offices in Congress, that, Bronze Age pervert is one of the most popular people to read if you're a Trump staffer. And I see those things actually moving into things like national security strategies, about the civilizational suicide of Europe. Now, I recognize we're not going to agree on all this, right? This part, I'm not going to try to bridge the gap. What I will say is that the other thing I think people on the left see has been a sort of movement from 2016 to 2024, where it's almost unbelievable how far things have gone, right? Even Trump 1 to Trump 2 are very, very different beasts. And so all of a sudden, it doesn't look impossible to imagine that Fuentes and Carlson and Fishback are the future, not the fringe. I think a lesson that has been burned into many of us is that it is dangerous to dismiss something that seems to have a lot of energy around it as a fringe, because what is today's fringe is tomorrow's, maybe not center, but much more live and potent political force.
And would you say that you saw that happen on the left between 2014 and 2024?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In part, I think you guys are about to learn some lessons we learned.
Yeah. I mean, maybe so, but I would argue that actually the right has done a better job at managing it. And I think we'll see, and I hope I'm right, that with something like the Fishback campaign, I think of James Fishback as a human meme. It's like amazing. He's like, if you take the mimetic energy from that corner of the online discourse and turned it into a human being, it's like it would look and sound like James Fishback. But the reality is that once those ideas gain contact with the people, the culture, the institutions on the right, they're not going anywhere.
Let me try to frame this more in
and the
terms
point
of
on diversity.
Let me try to frame this more in terms of arguments I've seen you making.
Sure.
And tell me if I get a chain in this wrong, you tell me where.
I will.
Right? I think you now have a problem with a racialist right. I think watching the takeover of conspiracies after Kirk's murder has been sobering or scary for a lot of people on the right. To watch people accusing Israel of it, to eventually see people accusing Turning Points USA of it, or some kind of plot from the people around him, I think has been, for major figures on the right, to be making those arguments has seemed to me to be a kind of shocking moment for a lot of you. And then I've watched you and others, on X and elsewhere, like look in your mentions and be like, oh shit, there's a lot of racism here. Something's happening. So
Sure.
you tell me which part of this you don't agree with.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's how I see it, and your general analysis is correct. So there is a racialist right, let's say. I've been writing about this for a number of years, but I think a lot of it is something of an optical illusion, where
listen to this motherfucker. So the quote racialist right is an optical illusion? Dude, this is why black people don't want to vote Republican in great numbers. This is literally like Palomino or some of these other fucking bottom feeding, chat rats defending Be Brave. It's an optical illusion. Oh, you didn't understand him. What he meant was to get the fuck out of here with that shit.
And you see this on let's say on the left, where a small group of people that is very loud online appears to represent a larger share of a political coalition or the general population than it really does. And so, look, I don't want a racialist right. That is like a clear position on my part, and I think to the extent that we have like anti-Semitic conspiracy theories bubbling up from the digital sphere, it's a problem that we have to deal with. That an untruth or a falsehood that should be called out for what it is, and what I think it is at heart is that, and I've talked to a lot of young right-wing guys, so sometimes I'll have lunch or dinner when I'm in DC or elsewhere with younger guys and just say, hey, kind of walk me through like what's happening for people. Like we're older now. You and I are middle-aged now. So say, hey, walk me through this thinking, and then kind of non-judgmental, just kind of help me understand what's happening with some of the more kind of radical or racialist young men. And this is the description that they give. They say, these are guys who hit high school during COVID. They kind of transitioned into an almost a purely digital life with all of the various rabbit holes you could get into. They came of age as a function of your kind of entering adulthood during the kind of George Floyd hysteria, where their teachers at school, their media, institutions, the government, everyone was saying, you're a young white man, you're the problem, you're the oppressor, you're evil, you should be denied opportunities because of your biology, because of your ancestry. and essentially that they were programmed by the kind of George Floyd hysteria into thinking racially. And instead of what I think is the proper and the correct response, which is to say, we've got to move beyond this. We're going to fight this racialist thinking on the left, on the right, wherever it comes from. They essentially psychologically submitted to it, but then reversed the polarity. I don't think that's a good way to pursue it. I don't think on the kind of philosophical question it's right. I don't think that from the practical political conception it's fruitful. But in a certain way, it's like, I get it. I understand it. Young people are, kind of in a position of growing up and having a chip on your shoulder. I think it's extremely destructive. And what I see as the antidote to this, at least within my political coalition, is to be, an older brother figure to say, hey, I could get why you think that. However, the actual path to success is this other way. So I don't think that this is like predetermined. I actually think that young people have their brain isn't locked in its ways. And so I think you want to bring people who are frustrated towards a better path. And I think that someone like Candace Owens, who's just like driving people into a ditch, you have to kind of guide them away from that.
So I think first there's truth to that narrative. I do think that one of the things that happened over the past decade or so, and this is, something I talk about in my first book, Why We're Polarized, is there was a huge upsurge in telling people that the right way to understand life, America, is all through the lens of identity groups. And when you tell people to look at identity groups, they will form a more coherent sense of their own. And a line I have in that book is, identity activates under threat.
Sure.
And so the more you tell people that their identity is a problem, the more they're going to begin to defend that identity and feel that identity and begin to self-define around that identity. So I think all of that happened.
And I think that you would also agree, perhaps, that the institutions, the legal system, the prevailing narrative at universities, corporations, et cetera, was explicitly anti-white for a number of years, that for these young people were formative.
I think it's sometimes moved into being anti-white. I would not say it was all explicitly
I did
anti-white.
hundreds of reports on this from institutions, from banks, corporations, universities. White man bad. If you wanted to just put it into kindergarten language, white man bad. And that was the dominant position for the institutional left.
I remember telling people around me that this thing where people are putting out like papers on what are the negative traits of whiteness was a disaster. Right. So I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think there's truth to it.
And legally, affirmative action, DEI, was institutional, government-backed discrimination against one racial group.
So the thing that I'm interested in, though, here is that you're now in power. And
I live on a farm in Washington State.
Your executive orders get past the whole thing. And these things can all go in better or worse directions. These are all...
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up here. I gotta get some sleep. Got stuff to do. Hauling stuff to school tomorrow. Let's see if Aaron C is back. Let's see. Okay, you know what? I tell you what, of Aaron C. I know that white supremacy kind of clouds your vision, but bitch. Come back tomorrow when you can spell my name correct. The one thing you're not going to do to me, son, is disrespect me by continuing to misspell my name. You were welcome. Oh, excuse me. You're welcome here as long as you can be respectful. But dude, I crush little bottom feeders like you, Aaron C. Don't push your luck, son. And for the rest of you who actually can spell and add 27 plus 27, I appreciate it. Sorry, I have to kind of cut it short, but I should be back tomorrow afternoon, hopefully a little earlier than I did today. So see you all tomorrow. Have a good night.